You have to provide the environment. What is the environment? And so here's the takeaway exercise I'd love for you to do with your team, or even just yourself. This is complete this sentence. I feel most connected in an environment that does what? And these finish the sentence. I feel most connected. If you're managed people, if you lead a team, go back and ask your team to complete the sentence. I do the best job. I feel most connected to you in an environment that does what? I promise you, one of the things they're going to tell you is where recognition happens. Where people get recognized. Because we know that what gets recognized gets repeated. What gets rewarded gets repeated.
So whenever I hear somebody say they cannot reach their dreams or their vision or their goals because they don't have enough resources, they don't have enough support, they don't have the right territory, they don't have a right whatever, I just want to say, shut up. I mean, that's my inside voice. Just because there are people out there who have started with less and grew to be such huge successes. So I want you to first and foremost have a vision. And if you are in a position of leadership, make sure you communicate and articulate what that vision is to the people who need to support you in that vision. Make sure everybody is clear about what that vision is. And I hope you don't have a boss, or I hope you are not a boss like the one that I had. I had a boss who had no vision. And I know he had no vision because one day I asked them this question. I said, hey boss, if you could wave a magic wand and have any dream job, what would it look like? Because I grew up with my dad always asking the kids, where do you see yourself next week, next month, next year? What are your goals? What's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan? What are your tombstone goals? Write them out, let's talk. So I thought everybody had that sort of planning, they're visualizing. I thought everybody had that, but no. My boss certainly didn't have it. So when I asked him, if you could wave a magic wand and have your ultimate dream job, what would it be? What would it look like? He said, ultimate dream job. Gosh, I've never even thought about it. Well, if you've never thought about your ultimate dream, you're probably not living it.
Humor, it oxygenates the body, makes you feel good. It revitalizes your attitude. It's the gateway to a better attitude. That's why I always, whenever I'm speaking, I always start off with the element of humor. If you don't have humor, I think you're in a tough spot. You got to choose to lighten up. One of the things I like to do is I like to collect funny stories. I'll listen to people's stories. I love the story I heard a short time ago about a little boy. His daddy put him to bed. Little boy's in the room for like 10 minutes, and he calls out to his dad, Daddy, can you bring me some water? Daddy's like, go to bed. You had your chance. You missed it. 5 minutes later, Daddy, I need water. He's like, go to bed, or I'll come in there and I'll spank you. 5 minutes later, little boy goes, Dad, what? When you come to spank me, bring water.
My great city of Seattle, Washington, every year an amazing event takes place, but 11 years ago something unique happened. It's the Seattle Special Olympics. 9 kids line up at the 100-yard dash. They're ready to run the race, but I'll tell you something. These are all mentally or physically disabled kids. I don't think they're going to run that fast. I mean, really, if you think about it. How fast can they be? But I'll tell you this, they're going to run with a relish to win. Why? This entire stadium is packed full of people. Of all the people that love them and care about them, their neighbors and parents and grandparents and friends. And the gun sounds, and 9 kids take off down the track. And they're running down the track, but one boy tumbles and falls at the start. The other 8 runners run down the track, and they hear him cry. And so they all stop, and they all look back, and then they all 8 went back. It's the longest 100-yard dash in Special Olympic history that's ever been timed. And they all 8 go back to this little boy on the track crying, and a little girl with Down syndrome, she bends down and she kisses the boy on top of the head and said, this will make it better, and they pick him up and dry his eyes and calm him down. And then they lock their arms together. And they get back in their lanes. And they walk down this track together, crossing the finish line to a standing ovation and not too many dry eyes. And you know why I love telling the story? You know why? Because winning is great, is it not? There's something greater than that, ladies and gentlemen. It's helping people to win.
When I was with my father, I would come home a lot of times and I'd say, Dad, I guess maybe I just can't do it. Maybe I'm just not that smart. And he would say, son, don't ever let me hear you talk bad about yourself. He said, And this is something I never forget. I tell this story all the time, and every time I get little goosebumps because it was like he just said it this morning. He said, son, don't ever let me hear you talk bad about yourself. And then he said this, never let what's on the outside define what's on the inside. He said, son, you just be the best you that you can be. Now, I don't know about you. I'm sure that probably doesn't mean very much, but to me, that was the world. That was the thing that let me know that no matter what was happening, that no matter what other people said about me, it didn't become true until I responded to it. That no matter what the statistics and the prognosticators and no matter what the chances of my success were, that it was always on me, that it was always my responsibility, that it was always my choice in whether I chose to participate. It was always my choice in whether I chose to be what they expected me to be or whether I was going to be all that I was created to be.
Being a communicator, leading by example, having vision. But there's one other thing, one other element that I happen to think, this is my pet theory, you may think I'm utterly crazy, but it's one element that I see as an executive coach, I see really missing in the workplace today. I think it's the least mentioned, the most overlooked, and the most essential element of having a great workplace and being a good leader. It's really what helped some of the great leaders and contributors of the world, like Stephen Hawking, who was given 2 years to live, and yet he went on. He did not succumb to that sentence. He went on and became this noted physicist and teacher. Or there's Helen Keller, who's another example of what I'm talking about. And even though she, due to childhood illness, she was blind and deaf, as I'm sure you all know, she went on to become the first deaf-blind person ever to earn a bachelor's degree. Did you know that? From Harvard, Radcliffe then, which has become part of Harvard. The first person ever to accomplish that because of this one trait. And in what I think is probably the greatest and most dramatic example in all of human history, the Viennese psychiatrist, Dr. Viktor Frankl. Some of you may remember that name from Psych 101 in college. Dr. Viktor Frankl was in the Nazi death camps, not just one camp, but he was in several camps, including the most notorious Dachau and Auschwitz. And yet, he was able to take that horrendous experience and turn it into what I think is one of the most instructive books of all time. And it was because of this one element. And this element that I'm talking about is hope. Because hope is the one thing we can never be without. Hope is the jet fuel for the journey of work and life.
So I want to end with one story. And the story is this. There was a little boy, his name was Robert. His parents called him Bobsy for short. He lived in Phoenix, Arizona. And when he was 6 years old, he woke up one night in terrible pain, couldn't get it to stop. They took him to the hospital. They discovered he had terminal cancer. And they said, you've got maybe 6 weeks, 7 weeks to live. And if you can imagine, if you were a parent and you heard that about your child, you'd be very distressed. But the parents were very much like the parents that we talked about with Roger Crawford, where they said, look, nobody can do everything, but we believe in you. Look, they asked him a question, what did you want to be when you grew up? And he said, well, I wanted to be a fireman. And so they went to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. They said, we've got a son, he's going to die. We're wondering if you could give him a ride on a fire truck so he could have his dream come true in a kind of a minor way. And the Phoenix fire chief, who I've later gotten to know since we learned the story, said, look, we'll do better than that, lady. We're going to make him chief of the fire department for a whole day. Said, you give us his measurements, we're going to give him a hat that says chief, we're going to get a slicker, rain boots, the whole deal, and we'll make it to fit his size. So a week later, they show up at the hospital and they bring him down, and a guy named Fireman Bob, Bobsy's namesake in a sense, they put him on the back of a hook and ladder truck. They took him out on a fire call that day, 3 fire calls that day, and he got to see all the things they would normally see. And the chief was not, pejorative or condescending. He'd always say, well, Bobsy, this is what we normally do. Let me tell him all, but you're the chief, what do you think? He'd say, sounds good, do it. So he'd watch all this, and the news crews came and they saw this kid and they interviewed him. He ended up being on the 10 o'clock news, the 6 o'clock news, the 11 o'clock news and all that. And he gets back to the hospital, he's watching himself on the news. He had a great day. Now he went on to live a couple months longer than anyone ever thought he would because they think partially this was such a powerful experience. But eventually his vital signs did all begin to wane. And they said, we've got to bring the parents in. They called him up, and then the head nurse said, let's call the fire department, see if we can get a fireman to come over and just stand by his bedside to remind him of this victory he had in his life. And so they called the fire department. They said, look, we'll do better than that. We'll be there in about 15 minutes. Tell you what, open his third floor window, because they knew where his room was, and we're going to come in by hook and ladder. And tell the hospital patients we don't want to freak them out like there's some emergency. So they went on the intercom, and about 15 minutes later, 5 or 6 firemen came up through the ladder into his room, and they actually picked him up with his parents' permission, and they were rocking him. And he looks up at the chief, and he says, Chief, does this mean I'm a real fireman? And the chief looks down and said, Bob, see, you were always a real fireman, son. You go to God now and feel rested and know that you're a fireman for life. And he died a few minutes later. Now, I tell you that story for 2 reasons. Number one, we're all touched by a story like that. Why? Because here's a boy who had what? His dream come true. And we'll do anything we can for a child to have their dream come true because we really value the children. But here's the deal. Tonight, you're going to be brushing your teeth, and you're going to be looking in the mirror, and you're going to stop for a minute like you don't normally do, and you're going to look in your eyes. And you're going to see behind those eyes are another pair of eyes. It's the little Bobsy that lives in you, the little child in you that also has dreams. And I want you to stop and take a moment and make a commitment to that child that you will do whatever it takes for their dream to come true, just like you would do for your own child. And if you do that, and you make that commitment, and you apply these principles, I promise you, the best is still yet to come for your life.